Um, my name is Devdutt Pattanaik, and I'll attempt to, in the next couple of minutes, to explain what is this topic all about. Please note the title carefully. It says Mythic Origins of Ahimsa. I have not referred to anything like Hindu origins or Indian origins, because we assume that the origin of these thoughts are Indian. That's an assumption. We are a bit of a chauvinistic people when it comes to culture. We are looking at it at a thought level. What does this thought mean for human beings? And I will take you at a thought level rather than at a geographical level or ethnic level or a religious level. That's not important. It doesn't matter the geography of this thought or the history of this thought. What matters is to figure out where in the human consciousness does this thing fit in. And when you think in those terms, then you break free from the tyranny of history and geography, and you focus on the idea. And let's look at the idea. Ahimsa in a simplistic way means non-violence. And let's begin with that. First, let me explain my designation, because it becomes very interesting. You see, if you see the pyramids in Egypt, what happens with the pyramids in Egypt? It looks like a gigantic structure. This was literally built 5,000 years ago. It was built with human hands, with geometrical precision, and it's precisely aligned to astronomy. So if you look at the amount of science which has gone into it, it's fantastic. But if you ask why did people build it, you don't really get an answer. It makes no sense to the modern man. Because the amount of resources that have been spent to build this makes no logical sense. What was the logical reason for it? Did it provide food for anyone? Did it provide clothing, shelter? Did it help survival of people? If you look at this gigantic endeavor, it makes no sense until you ask the question why. Why did the king of a land, however prosperous, invest his wealth to build such giant, and what were they meant for? To house tombs. Dead pharaohs lived here. Why would anybody invest? This is about 200 years of work in front of you. Whether it is today or yesterday, at any time in human life, why would we invest a portion of our wealth to build something which has absolutely no function? But the thing is, we look at it from our perspective. From today, modern man perspective, it looks like an absurd endeavor. We may look at it as a museum piece. But let's enter the mind of the man who builds it. And when you look at it from the point of view of the man who builds it, he has been told that if he houses his body in this particular way, he will live forever. So when the promise is immortality, pyramids are a small price to pay. And therefore, the word belief. Belief, I define it as subjective truth, and hence myth. This is the definition of myth that I follow. A subjective truth, not an objective truth. An objective truth is a logical, rational, scientific truth which is followed by experimentation and evidence. A subjective truth doesn't rely on evidence. It is based on faith. I believe in it. This is what the Egyptians believed in. They believed if the heart was measured against a feather of justice and it measured appropriately, you would be allowed access to the land of the dead or the kingdom of Osiris forever. Two things were required. Not only should your heart weigh, but your physical body had to survive time. The monster you can see over there would eat your body if your heart didn't weigh correctly. But the body had to be preserved in a particular way. Hence this elaborate structure that we today call a pyramid. Nobody believes in this anymore. If you don't believe in this, this structure instantly becomes absurd. But when you believe in it, this becomes the most sacred of structures in the world. That is the role of belief. All over the world, people believe in something which shapes their behavior. Some people believe in a book. Some people believe in a prophet. Some people believe in a nation state. Some people believe in a constitution. Some people believe in money. Some people believe in fame. Some people believe in beauty. But we believe in something, and that shapes our lives. Ask a believer, what is the truth? And they will always say, my truth is the truth. Ask a non-believer, and he will say their truth is myth. And that is where conflicts emerge. So the word belief comes from a very simple 3B model. From belief comes behavior, from behavior comes business. So if you ask, what are you doing in your life? I will ask the next question, how do you do it? And then why do you do it? What you do is the business you are in. How you do it is your behavior. And why you do it is your belief. Look at this and you will be able to understand the sacred structures around the world, the non-sacred structures around the world, the religious structures and the non-religious, the secular structures. Nation state, is it a belief or is it objective reality? 500 years ago, the notion of a nation state did not exist. A bunch of people came together and said, this is the best way to conduct civil society. You don't need a king. And the nation state as a concept was born. We believed in it, and hence you have the electoral process, and today you have nation states. If I don't believe in a nation state, then the electoral status completely collapses, and the business will be not that of a nation state. So the word belief has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with mythology. It means simply that, what you believe in, the subjective truth. We just have become arrogant as to assume that belief is restricted to the religious realm. It is not. It exists in every sphere of our life. And therefore for me, where I see mythology everywhere. Not just in the past, but everywhere. The most rational human being has a subjective truth, and that is his myth. Let us now coming to Ahimsa. The question is, what is Ahimsa? Is it a belief? Is it a behavior? Or is it a business? If you don't like the word business being associated with Ahimsa, let's replace the word with outcome. It makes it easier. But what is Ahimsa? Is it a belief? Is it a behavior? Or is it an outcome? Is the first question to ask. Because the fundamental mistake we do is, if I believe in Ahimsa, I will behave in a particular way. But merely because I behave in a particular way doesn't mean I believe in it. So for example, if I respect elders, in India, the way to physically express it is to fall at the feet of an elder person. But if I fall at the feet of an elder person, does it mean I actually respect the elder? Behavior doesn't mean belief, but belief can lead to behavior. I believe in non-violence, and therefore I'll express it using very little vegetarian food. But simply because I eat vegetarian food doesn't mean I believe in non-violence. One has to be very careful. The arrows flow in one direction, not the other. And therefore the fundamental question is, what is Ahimsa? Is it a belief? Is it a behavior? Or is it the outcome? Fundamentally, when we use the word Ahimsa, we use it in terms of behavior. So we have a set of guidelines. If you behave in this way, it means you have no Ahimsa in you. But I feel the Mythic Origins of Ahimsa looks at Ahimsa at a very much more complex level. And my endeavor today is not to talk about Gandhi's Ahimsa, because that is done. But look at the idea of non-violence. Why does it fit in the human scheme of things? And to understand this, we have to go to the beginning. I have this notion. Gangotri means the origin of a river called Ganga. Ganga is the sacred river of India. So if you want to understand the course of a river, you have to study its source. In the same way, if you want to understand an idea, you have to understand its source. So if you want to understand Ahimsa, you have to understand the source of the concept. Where does it come from? And typically, if you study in the scriptures, they are obsessed with studying nature, because they say before human beings, nature always existed. So study nature, and then understand how human beings and nature correlate with each other. Let's look at nature. If I look at this picture, who is non-violent? Answers. The deer. Have you asked the grass?
The tree. I'm thinking of the two images you had. Sorry. Yes.
When I showed the entire picture,
yes.
Who is non-violent? The tree, there's the sun,
And
there are clouds. What do we see in a picture? The deer is as violent as the cheetah.
Yes.
And the tree is as violent as the deer.
How is the tree? Excuse me, but how is the tree as well?
If two seeds were to be growing in the same soil, one tree will grow at the cost of the other. There is violence there. It's just that we don't recognize it because we assume that life is all from our perspective. But let us look at things from every creature's point of view. If the cheetah is violent, yes, but if she doesn't chase the deer, she will starve and die. Her children will starve and die. Is that acceptable? To save the deer, are we allowed to let the cheetah starve and her children starve? To save the grass, are we comfortable allowing the deer not to starve? If all the deer starve, the grass will not die. The banyan tree is extremely violent. It doesn't let a blade of grass grow under it. I heard recently a poetry by Rahim. He's one of the 15th century poet from the court of King Akbar. And he says every time the breeze blows, the berry tree moves left and right happily. And her happiness is unacceptable to the banana plant, because every time the berry tree moves, its thorns split and tear the leaves of the banana plant. Who is cruel in this song? Is it the wind, which is blowing and making the berry plant move? Is it the berry plant, which can't help but move to the wind? God has given it thorns which strike the banana plant. Is it the fault of the banana plant? Because it can't move physically. It has to be there and its leaves are delicate. Strike against the thorns. Who should be blamed here? So let's look at this image of nature again and ask ourselves, where is the violence here? And we'll see violence everywhere. At every aspect, because the law of the jungle says survival of the fittest. Might is right. That is the way nature functions. So two plants will fight for survival. And one will die in the process. Every animal survives. So violence is there in Prakriti. Prakriti is a Sanskrit word for nature. So if I look around and look at these beautiful trees, but if you were to ask David Attenborough, who made this wonderful National Geographic documentary on plants, and he has done these beautiful camera works which shows time over 10 days passing as 1 second, and you will observe how violent plants are, and they fight with each other to get the sunlight, or they fight with each other to get the rainwater, or they fight for nutrients, because nature is about competition, and competition is violent. So this is Prakriti, this is nature. The tree is fighting, the shrubs are fighting, the grass is fighting, the deer is fighting, the cheetah is fighting. It's just that it's not simply seen by the human eye unless we sit and observe. And therefore the Indian idea of darshan is the most simple word in India for philosophy. It means two things. It means the subject of philosophy, darshan. It also means the process of philosophy, which is observation. Merely by observation can wisdom come. So imagine yourself sitting on a rock under a tree watching the scene, and what would you see? Would you see cruelty, or would you see the law of nature at work? It's up to you, because it is as much a story of nature as it is about you. Because no one is innocent, no one is guilty over here. There is no guilt, there is no shame, there is no hero, there is no victim. In nature, there is only nature at work. Words like hero, victim, guilty, sinful, violent, non-violent are human constructions, not natural phenomena. So look at this image again and observe nature in its, as they say, red in tooth and claw. And this is what nature is. Observe this and then remember that every animal lives in fear. Fear of scarcity. So this is the cheetah. Not sure whether it will get food today. Not sure whether it will get the food for itself and its child. So this violent animal with claws and fangs and capable of ripping the entrails of a deer is frightened. Frightened for survival. It's not the way we look at it. Because the poets will support the deer. And the deer is terrified of predators. It's frightened of predators because there's a predator all there. There's a tiger, there's a lion, there's a cheetah, everybody, the hyena, the wild dog wanting to eat it. And nature has been kind to both. One has been given speed, she has been given speed too. He has been given speed too. And all of them have got speed. But one has got strength, some have got cunning. Nature has given everybody something and said survive. No favorites in nature. Humans are 99% animals. Genetically speaking, 96%, but 99 sounds more dramatic. It means that all the instincts of every plant and every animal is within us at a genetic level. So within us is the fear of scarcity. And within us is the fear of the predator. It's not gone away. Millions and millions of years of evolution, the memories are inside us, embedded in us. You ask a neurophysician and he will say how our spinal cord connects with plants. Our middle brain, or thalamus and hypothalamus, connects with animals. What separates us from animals is just one organ. Can you take a guess? Which organ? There's one organ that separates us from the entire animal kingdom.
Is it the brain?
The brain. Specifically the forebrain. The larger brain, the cerebrum, the frontal cortex of the cerebrum, if you want to be absolutely exact. This frontal cortex, this part of the brain, is what is unique to human beings. It doesn't exist in nature. This one part. And it has made a dramatic difference in our consciousness and the who we are as animals. Because we are animals as far as nature is concerned, but different from all other animals because of this one few grams of nervous tissue. You see, this part of the brain has more grey cells than any other creature in the world, and it allows us to do one thing that no animal can do. Can you guess?
Think ahead.
Think ahead. Use a simpler word, much more fundamental than that. Much more fundamental than that.
Contemplate.
Much more fundamental. Very simple word.
Plan.
Much more fundamental.
Feel.
Much more. Feeling, animals feel. Animals feel.
Memory.
Memory, animals have memory.
Thought.
Much more fundamental.
Reflect.
Much more fundamental. Look at the word I'm using. Fundamental. These are sophisticated words. Plan and reflect. Very fundamental. Something you will be able to explain to a child.
Imagine.
Imagine. We can imagine. Think about it. Animals cannot imagine. Plants cannot imagine. We can. That's the nature's gift to humanity. The ability to imagine. Now what happens when you imagine? What is the first thing that you're going to imagine if 99% of your being is suffocated by the fear of scarcity and predators?
Plenty. Having food.
Having plenty of food and protection. That's the first thing you're going to use. You want no scarcity and no predators. We call it the promised land. This image can only be created on Photoshop. Or when the lion is completely satisfied after its meal. So there is a lion with a lamb. This is a line from the Bible. The lion shall lay with the lamb. Technically it doesn't exist in the Bible, but it's a popular belief that it exists in the Bible. Lion and lamb. The lion has no fear of scarcity gets fed. And the lamb has no fear of predator because the lion is fed. This is heaven. This is what we imagine.
For both the lion
And the deer. I'm not sure of the grass
No.
yet. But you see, this is our notion of perfection. Ask any human being anywhere in the world, in any time and space. Talk to the Eskimo, talk to the Aboriginal, talk to the tribal, the Maasai tribal. Everybody is asking for a life where there is no scarcity and no predators, where I feel safe. We call this a home, a sanctuary. When you come, there is pleasure and nothing that causes pain. In Buddhism, it is called the yearning for sukha and avoiding dukkha. You can use very sophisticated terminologies to explain this very simple state of heaven. I don't know how many of you all are from Gujarat. Or anyone has visited the state of Gujarat. There's a very famous tea there called Wagh Bakri Chai. It's a tea brand which says the tiger and the goat. So they are saying the tiger can stay with the goat happily. That is heaven, and that's what you will experience when you drink this tea. It's a fantastic branding if you think about it. But it's called Wagh Bakri Chai. It's one of the most successful tea companies in India. It's a very local tea company, and all the tea companies in the world have tried to penetrate that market and failed. Because you see, that tea promises heaven. But you see, imagination also amplifies our fears. So you can only imagine scarcity even in the middle of abundance. And you will imagine predators even when there is no threat to you. That is the human imagination. That is the curse of humanity. Even when you are fully secure, you will feel insecure. And even when you have all the wealth in the world, you will think like a poor man, a starving man. Because scarcity is a mindset, not a material reality. And predators are imaginary and very rarely real. This is where stress comes from. We fear the worst. We create locks and padlocks and structures and security agencies because we imagine an invasion. Imagination can never be controlled. So nature has played a very clever trick with us. By giving us imagination, she has made our life wonderful and miserable at the same time. When the cheetah has had its meal, it has experienced heaven. But when a human being makes his first billion, he still wonders when will he make the next billion. This is the human condition. And you have to understand this if you want to understand Ahimsa. You see, because this is the human spectrum. No scarcity to only scarcity. No predator to only predator. Zero to infinity. Animals are incapable of such thought. The deer will be hunted, the cheetah will eat, it will forget about its hunger until the hunger returns the next day. Till that time, it is completely safe. And in fact, it's the easiest time to hunt an animal once they have hunted, because all their instincts have gone down. It's very difficult to hunt a hungry animal. But an animal which is well fed, all its instincts go down. You can hunt it very easily. Human beings are imagining. The animal has no sense of no scarcity. It has no sense of only scarcity. This entire human spectrum from zero to infinity exists because of imagination. If I were to put number 1 over here, 1, with 0, 1 and infinity, animals exist only in that one space, while human beings have this entire spectrum before them. 0 in Sanskrit is known as shesha, or the residue. And infinity means ananta, infinity. And so when you have the images of deities and gods being presented in India, they'll say, he sleeps on the serpent whose name is Ananta Shesha, infinity and zero. This is a metaphor for the human condition. It is actually saying that divinity is cradled in imagination. This is a very profound metaphor for saying divinity is cradled in the human imagination, which extends from zero, shesha, to infinity, anant. And it is visualized as this great serpent, and you have the deity sleeping on it. Now this is a metaphor, trying to explain a concept of imagination, and what an important role imagination plays in the human condition. Now because we have imagination, we become creative. And I don't want scarcity, so what do? I domesticate the earth. So how do you create abundance? How is it that we get food in our houses, whether really working in a farm or going on a hunt? It is because someone produces it for us. Someone domesticated the earth. Look at this image very carefully. Do you see the violence here? Can you see the violence here? Do the darshan. Observe carefully.
It's the animal.
The animal is a bull which has been castrated to turn into a bullock. That is violence. The animal has been castrated so that a plow can be pulled. It has been domesticated. A plant has been domesticated. It has been cut down and turned into a plow. Trees have been burnt. The ground has been leveled so that man decides what seed shall be sown, what seed shall not be sown. We have decided this shall be the crop and that shall be the weed. And that is what is being sown, and that will be harvested in a very violent act, and then threshed in a very violent act. And the grain shall be collected and then pounded. Have you ever seen cooking? It is one of the most violent activities. There's pounding, and there's grinding, and there's mixing, and there is roasting. It's just that we don't see it as violence. We imagine this lovely mother sitting there baking bread. You see, that's how poetry transforms it into a delicate activity. But it's an extremely violent activity. Look at the amount of plants. I just today went to a golf course, and I was wondering how many plants were destroyed to create the golf course. It's a beautiful place to walk to, but belies the violence necessary to create it. Violence is there in the human civilization. To build a house, we domesticate the earth. We have domesticated fire. We have domesticated water. So the water, we don't go to the water comes to us through pipes. So dams were built, forests have been destroyed, lakes have been controlled, animal will not be allowed access to it. We have domestic, and that is how culture is constructed. It is the human condition. We construct culture through domestication of the earth. So if you read ritual practices across the world, there are practices of the dying god. It's known as, in the Near East, it was called Adonai, which the word Adonai has now become part of the Jewish tradition, and Adonai is the name of the Lord. But it's the whole idea of the dying and the resurrecting god, or the tales of Tammuz, or Ishtar. These are stories of gods who die and come back. They're talking about vegetation which dies and comes back. And the god has to be killed. They're talking about harvesting. The act of harvesting was recognized as violence, but violence which is necessary for survival, to make the bread. And if you don't want predators, you want to restrain. Do you see the violence here? The animal has been restrained. We like animals which are domesticated. We don't like animals which are not. We like pets. And the best pets are human pets. All of us are domesticated. Our minds have been domesticated to follow the rules. How's the first form of violence that a child experiences? Toilet training. We train the child to control its bowels. And we say it's good for you. And it is good for society, because if everybody did what they wanted to do, we would be in anarchy. So to create a civilized society, we have rules. And rules are nothing but the domestication of the mind, which says this is okay and this is not okay. So when you see a red signal, stop your car. If it's a green signal, go. Our mind has been domesticated to create civil society. But domestication by necessity is a violent act. The free mind is controlled and shaped in a particular way, so it fits into a very neat, very neat template that is acceptable to human beings, that human beings are comfortable with. So we have the notion of voluntary domestication. We sign a contract. So all businesses have the notion of contract. It has its roots in the commandments. It says, I agree to behave in a particular way. That means I will not be the wild animal. I will domesticate. Marriage as an institution is seen as a contractual agreement. I will not be free to do whatever I want. Now these are the rules that I shall follow. So you have the whole notion of rules coming into our lives, into human society. Rules and regulations and guidelines which tell us how to behave. We choose to let go of our free spirit and we say, because there is something we get. It's a quid pro quo. I get something back from society. If I behave in a civilized way, I get access to the wealth of that society. I get access to the comfort of that society. I get part of the sanctuary that is offered. However, if I don't agree with the rules that you are giving me, how do I look at the contract? I consider it to be enforced domestication. The slavery in Egypt, mentioned in the Exodus. This is when exploitation takes place, when my domestication is not by my own free will, but has been imposed upon me by a power. Then I don't like it. I want to be liberated from it. It bothers me when somebody forces me into this space. Now how do I react? I react like the Greek heroes. I want to defy it. I consider the rules to be a monster that I want to kill like the Hydra. So Greek myths talk of defiance constantly because the rules have become unbearable. The rules are involuntarily imposed by the self-imposed gods. This is what the gods do. They create rules that humans refuse to accept. This is the Greek narrative. Look at the difference between this image, where you have the benevolent God giving the rules, and the Greek gods who create monsters. Who decides whether the God is benevolent or malevolent? This is where violence comes from. Because you see, compliance of the rules has always been a problem, even in the biblical traditions. In any business practice, anybody who runs a business knows how difficult it is to get people to follow the rules, to follow the processes. It is a struggle. This is a university, I'm sure you have issues over rules and arguments over rules, and how should students behave, and how should teachers behave, and how should community members behave. There are always these conversations. You see, gradually we start becoming territorial. You see, and this image is showing us our animal side. We become territorial about my rules. My rules are very important and your rules are absurd. My rules are good for voluntary domestication. Your rules are about enforced domestication. So I become territorial about my rules. Then I dominate you through my rules. So we create pecking orders. Those who follow the rules are the good guys, and those who don't follow the rules are the bad guys. So the animal instincts resurface. And then the animal instincts lead to conflict. Your rule or my rule? Your rules or my rules? We don't evolve. Victory then becomes about validation. We validate ourselves through victory over anything. But you see, in India, they have three concepts. The concept of you can win at a material level. There is material victory. So you can fight over property. You can fight over the intellect. My idea versus your idea. What should be enforced and what should not be enforced. We can fight over thoughts. And we can fight at an emotional level. My relationship versus your relationship. We fight over relationships, about human emotions. So for the human mind, territory of domestication is much wider than the animal kingdom. The animals only think of food. We think in terms of LSD. That is Lakshmi, Saraswati and Durga.
By the way, if you go to any Durga Puja, you'll see all the five with those three.
So it's Lakshmi is material, intellectual and emotional. So when we talk about violence, we have to consider, when we consider human beings, material violence, which is physical violence that can be seen. There's intellectual violence, where ideas are suppressed and fought. And there's emotional violence, where there's emotional blackmail, manipulation, to manage you at an emotional level. All these three things are seen as violence in the human arena. So it's not just what can be seen, but it's also what cannot be seen. The seen and the unseen. You cannot see emotions, you cannot see the intellect, but you can see things. We have to distinguish between territories and property. Animals have territories for their survival, and they fight over territory for survival. Humans don't fight for territory, humans fight for property. Animals, you cannot bequeath animals do not bequeath their territory to their young ones. But I can inherit the property of my parents, even if I'm not worthy of it. Every animal has to fight for its territory. The alpha male does not appoint a prince except in Walt Disney films. But in the animal kingdom, there is no such thing as inheritance. Whole notion of inheritance comes from the human mind and the notion of property. And therefore, we are proprietorial, not just over material things, but also intellectual things and emotional things. What do we mean by material things? The land that I own, the car that I possess. What do I mean by emotion? My wife, my child is property. My family, my clan, my tribe, my country. It's an emotional property. And there's intellectual property. We all know of intellectual property rights. So how the human arena of battlefield has become so complex? Because when I have victory in any of these planes, I feel validated. So violence comes from where? In the animal kingdom, it exists in a survival space. But for the human beings, it is about validation. So I am violent at a material level, at an intellectual level, at an emotional level, because I yearn for validation. I feel powerful when I have won an argument. That is violence also. I feel, look at the court case. I love the miniseries. So many miniseries on television. American miniseries. Just observe how many of them are on the court cases. They all revolve around the court because it's about intellectual victory. It's not a physical fight. It's not a boxing match with Mike Tyson. That's physical violence. But intellectual violence happens everywhere, and emotional violence is there in most relationships. The question is, why is there violence? You see, because we feel of the question of imagined invalidation. When the rules restrain us, we feel invalidated. And we are yearning for validation. The Hindi word for invalidation is Purushartha. Purushartha. Validation of human existence. Animals don't have this. Maybe they do, but we are not. Humans have imagination. So how do we validate our lives? How do we justify our existence? We need a framework. We need a framework to tell us this is right and this is wrong. The question is, only humans beings have the ability to outgrow our animal instincts. We can outgrow our animal nature. The fear of scarcity and the fear of predators that brings in violence into the natural world, we can outgrow it. The possibility exists. And we are constantly reminded of this. You see, the Indian obsession with painting the forehead is perhaps a reminder of the cerebrum, that source of our imagination. The source of our humanity lies just beyond that skull. That makes us imagine. This is a very ancient Vedic ritual of the thread ceremony, where the teacher literally physically hits the student on the head before giving him initiation. It's almost as if physically reminding him that you are not an animal. You are not an animal because you have the cerebrum. And because you have the cerebrum, you can imagine. So you can outgrow the animal instinct of violence in order to survive, in order to live with life. The question is, are we exploring it? You see, the question is not about whether violence is good or bad. The question is, why are we violent? Is it for survival or is it for validation? Animals fight and kill for survival. Humans are violent for what? Is it for survival or for validation? Is it from where I get? Then I will fight. Because I feel I want validation. I refuse to submit to the law. You see the acts of anarchy. Where does anarchy come from? Where does terrorism come from? Someone feels they are domesticated by force and they react in violence. So why is there violence? Physical violence may not be there, but there may be intellectual violence. There may be emotional violence. There may be cultural violence. Violence of different sorts, subtle forms of violence. More questioning, for whom are we violent? Are we violent for myself or for others? You see, this concept exists only in human beings. Because we are self-aware, we can think about, we are aware of things that are not ourselves. If I were to be very, very pedantic about it, this is neti, which means not me, not this, not that, which is the definition of divinity in the ancient scriptures. But that's not the idea. The point is only human beings are capable of thinking of others. So why am I violent? Why am I wanting to farm the land? Is it for myself or so that I can feed more people? Why am I domesticating animals? Is it only for myself or so that I can feed more people? Why am I mining the earth? Why am I creating rules? That is the question. For whom are we doing it and why are we doing it? You see, look at this image. This is a tantric image of the goddess Chinnamastika. It is representing nature. It shows sex. It can't be more blatant. There is a woman on top. Very specifically, the artist shows the woman on top to show it is voluntary, not involuntary. She is not being forced into submission. She is willingly, it's a pleasurable activity. That's how the tantrics used to show sexual, which is voluntary, by showing the woman on top. When the man is on top, you're not very sure what is it. But when the woman is on top, you have no doubt. And then they show an image of the goddess beheading herself and her blood being consumed by herself and her attendants. It is talking about how violence is intrinsic to the act of eating. To nourish ourselves. The food that we eat, the bread that we eat, the meat, the vegetables that we eat come from farms, and there is violence in the farms. It also recognizes the value of sex, which is reproducing life. Without that, there would be no pleasure, there would be no children. There would be no the second generation and the third generation. So the image in one shot captures Prakriti or nature, sex and violence, which is intrinsic in nature. Then comes the other, the consort of the goddess, who is not associated, no sex, no violence. Brahmacharya and Ahimsa, the complete opposite. Animals cannot even imagine this. We are capable of imagining a state where there is no sex and there is no violence. We can imagine it. So Shiva is often shown with an erect penis, alone. The point of it showing him alone is to show there is no sex there. That means he is not procreating. And he is shown as non-violent, sitting in this restrained position. So the sages are described as not eating, upavasa, not eating food. I don't eat food, so I don't consume foods, which means I don't need to domesticate nature, and therefore there is no violence. So the whole state of the rishis or the shramanas or the Buddhist monks or the Jain monks, they are trying to attain the impossible. They are trying to break free from the barriers created by nature using the human imagination. And they are traveling on this journey. So the mendicant represents everything that nature is not. So sex is intrinsic to nature. I said, I don't want to have sex. Violence is intrinsic to our nature. I said, in a way, I'm trying to break free from nature. I'm trying to go to the space which is beyond nature. Because I can imagine it. Because divinity exists in the cradle of imagination. And that is my aspiration. And that is the human condition. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the mythic origins of Ahimsa. It lies in the human imagination to break free from the human condition, which in turn is the ability to break free from the animal condition, where you don't have to be involved in violence for survival. Nor do you have to submit to violence for the sake of validation. So the idea of ahimsa is a very, very deep construct. It exists in the human imagination. And it is not restricted to history or geography or space and time. It is about the journey from the ape to the human to the divine. From violence for survival to violence for validation to a state of no violence at all, because I don't need to be validated. That's the complex journey. Moving out of material violence, emotional violence, intellectual violence. That is evolution. So the whole process is highly evolutionary. And therefore the sacred marks, therefore the rituals, which are constantly saying it is possible for us to be there. So it's not about a rule. So I believe that when we talk about ahimsa in India, it is not about the outcome. It is not about a behavior, but it is about a belief. It is about asking ourselves, sitting down and asking ourselves, why do we want to be non-violent? And for whom do we want to be non-violent? I think that introspection and speculation enables us to become better human beings. And I think that is the journey that begins with this one word. So that's my thought. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Pattanaik will be glad to take questions. So the floor is open to questions you might have.
This thing is brilliant.
No questions?
Prabir.
Yes, please.
My name is Praveen Yogi. That was an intellectually stimulating presentation, if I may say so. I have two questions for you. Have you bothered to write up your thoughts in any essays, pieces, or so on that you could?
I've got a website with 250 articles.
Okay, well, that's the first thing to know if you want to do
And
a
I have a
follow-up.
couple of my books if you wish to buy.
Okay. And second question is, are these philosophical thoughts replicate? I know you've tried to make it non-geographic and non-religious, but are these thoughts replicated in other cultures as well? Or is this something peculiar about our tradition which leads to this form of thinking?
Well, the only thing which distinguishes Indian subcontinent from the rest of the world is the idea of rebirth. That's the only one point difference.
Except that the Greeks had similar ideas at one
Not
time.
really. Not in the details that exist in India. They are aberrations in the Greek thought. They have the notion of the river Styx, that you cross only once, you don't cross it again. Vaitharani is crossed forever. So it's a question of leitmotif, or what is the dominant motive. That is the only difference that you have. Otherwise, the thoughts are very similar. So the differences you notice when you are, that's where the number infinity comes in India. And therefore the number 0 comes from India, because of the belief in rebirth. So there is a qualitative difference which shapes, that one qualitative difference of course has a remarkable difference downstream. But upstream, when you go upstream in thought, the ideas are very similar. So the idea of voluntary domestication, involuntary, that's why I use biblical images and I use Greek images. Because the best form to explain it is using those images. I wouldn't be able to give you an Indian equivalent. So that's where it comes from. So it's not peculiar to India, I feel. It's just a question of Indian. So you see, if you live only once, you want to live correctly. So you yearn for rules. Therefore, behavior becomes very important. So if you live only once, I want to live the right way. And therefore, rules, the sense of urgency. But if you live infinite number of times, you're not interested in how. Because every life you can live in a different way. You question why. So that is what perhaps makes India unique, because it's a highly reflective culture only because of that. So you're not in a hurry to live a good life or a perfect life. Because in this life you live like this, in the next life you live some other way, and third life you live some other way. So you have many options. The question is, okay, now that you have many options, why do I do what I do? So Indian thought would focus on the whys and less on the hows. So the question is, why do we have the Commonwealth Games? Not how do we have the Commonwealth Games?
We all know how.
So the best way to understand India is the why, not the how. That's a different topic by itself, but this is a simplistic way of explaining.
Yes, Harsh, you have a question.
Sorry, well, a question and a comment. The comment is the word ahimsa. I think we spoke about this morning. Is the negation of himsa. So ahimsa is a more positive, more dominant, more prevailing condition of all everything that lives. And those of us who, as you say, are evolved, will opt for ahimsa and go away from the innate condition of violence that we all have. That's number one.
Yeah.
And the question really is, was Gandhi really a non-violent person? His life began with violence, it ends in violence, and he leaves the whole country in a violent state.
See, depending on, let's look at the LSD axis. I feel the violence focused more on the behavior. So behavior, don't be violent, don't be violent, don't be violent. That was a very important part. And it requires a tremendous discipline not to be violent, because violence is such an intrinsic part of us. But I think somewhere you notice at an emotional level, there is an enforced domestication, which you find. You have to be violent, which creates in many people a sense of invalidation, because not everybody has that capability or the intellectual ability. You see, what happens is when you think that everybody is equally evolved, then everybody can behave equally. But if all of us are evolved in different ways, and this again depends on how you think. If you believe that all people are equal, then everybody is capable of, has the capacity to be non-violent. But if I believe that everybody has a different intellectual and emotional range, then not everybody can handle it. So those who can handle it find it a voluntary domestication and choose not to be violent. Those who are unable to handle it feel it is imagined invalidation, and they then become defiant. And this is what we see in the story of Gandhi. So I think it's a very nice way of observing what happens to the idea of violence and non-violence itself in the entire life. Had violence not happened in the train in South Africa, would Gandhi have been born? That's a speculation, of course. We will never know. But this is, how do you speculate? So you speculate by saying that if violence had not happened, would Gandhi have been born? So every act of violence is perhaps creating a Mahatma somewhere.
Thank you. Very, very interesting talk. And in this neck of the woods, in the West, there's been a lot of interest in evolutionary biology theories of religion, and people like Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett writing extensively on this. They're also in this camp, which is loosely called the New Atheists. And I think their basic thesis is, if we could get a handle on the evolutionary biological development of religion, we could grow up and grow out of myths. And myths are inherently and intrinsically violent. They lead people to destroy mosques, or conversely to fly planes into buildings, or imagine a Ram Raj that they will implement by force today, or or some utopian community that they will inflict on others. But so I'm not sure where you stand with that.
No,
where you don't see like growing up and out of myths.
No. Because it's what you are explaining is called the myth of mythlessness.
Okay.
Because they are, you see, where are they coming from? let's decode this, what you have said just now. One day there will be a world where we will outgrow myths. So they have visualized a promised land. So they are imagining a promised land, and there is the wilderness of myths through which they have to go through. And they will come up with the commandments of how to live in this wilderness. And who shall be the prophets to this promised land? The atheist. So you see, you have constructed a new mythosphere. The notion of myth is subjective truth. And so long as human beings have the cerebrum and individuality, will always be subjective in our thought. The idea of subjectivity is alien in most Western thinking, to the point that just do a Google search, not just not Western, but all English and modern thought. Because if you read even Indian scriptures which are translated in English, so read the Chinmaya Mission or read any of the Aurobindo's works, imagination is not even given importance. Yet it's such a fundamental human ability. So subjective thought as myth will always remain. As long as there are human beings, there will always be subjectivity. Or what I assume is the perfect world. But there is this notion of an objective reality which is mythical, which will unify all of us. It will never be so, because my experiences will always be unique to me. And your experiences will always be unique to you. And no matter how hard I try, I will not be able to cross the bridge. So it will be unique. So subjectivity will always remain. To imagine a world where I will outgrow subjectivity sounds mythical, doesn't it? But there's the arrogance of the scientist when he's assuming that he's higher than those inferior mythologists. And this is the reason why mythology is not taught in a single university in India. So I'm the only person who writes on mythology in India today. People tell the stories, but they don't understand the mythologies. But the notion of the promised land, a business, I talk in the business space, so my clients are CEOs and CFOs, and not the general public. And the first thing you do in a business is you write a vision statement. What's a vision statement? It's the promised land, a fantasy, a mythical world order that you want. And if that didn't exist, you see, just imagine 25 years ago, a man called Steve Jobs went to investment bankers and spoke poetry of a piece of something that you'll carry and watch movies in, doing like this. 25 years later, this is reality, but at that time, it was imagination. That was his subjective reality, from which has emerged this thing called iPad. So imagination and subjective reality will always be with us. It's just that I may not like your subjective reality, you may not like my subjective reality, and that's where conflict comes from. Empathy is the ability to understand and allow your subjective reality to coexist with mine, which is lacking in these authors. I find them extremely vicious and cruel because they look down upon people who have alternate imaginations. So I don't see them as kind people, I see them as cruel as the terrorist who will not allow you. That's an intellectual violence, this is a physical violence, but it's just violence nevertheless. Because one thinks you don't have a right to live, the other feels you don't have the right to imagine.
I have one question. Do you think humans in general aspire to be non-violent? Or
On my terms, I want to be non-violent.
my terms?
That's where the problem starts, doesn't it? So the father tells the son that I want you to live this way. And the son refuses to do that. And there is a violence between the father and son on emotional plane. Or mother-in-law, daughter-in-law conflicts, which are so popular in Indian soap operas, are violence over a territory called the sun. So when I have a very all-woman audience and I show this image, and I say, whenever I see this image, I remember the mother-in-law fighting the daughter-in-law. I don't think they're very flattered.
Which one is the daughter?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Just a question. When you show that image of mother-in-law fighting daughter-in-law, do you ever go behind as to why they're fighting? What is the structural condition that leads them to become enemies? And how the family system pits women against women in a system where it is patriarchal and women are always treated as outsiders? do you go into it at all, or you just sort of picture them as just fighting?
No, but I can replace this thought by talking about two brothers fighting over property. It's the same thing. It's just what do you consider property? Property
No,
is
that's not what I mean. When you sort of show the mother-in-law fighting the daughter-in-law, it appears as though if you just don't know the background as to what is the structural condition of their life, of their day-to-day life, as to why they are pitted against one another in a situation where they are sort of treated as outsiders in their natal families and in their new family and so on and so forth, how it leads women to become enemies of each other. You know?
But that doesn't take away the violence of it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. All I'm saying is,
Because
it's very important to know why they fight, not just they fight.
No, that's what I'm talking about. The conflict. Violence of all, anywhere violence is violence. Violence comes from territories. It doesn't matter whether it's women fighting, men fighting, children fighting, boys fighting, girls fighting, white people fighting, black people fighting, yellow people fighting. When there is violence, there is territory. You just have to identify what is the territory. The difference between animals and humans is the animal is fighting for survival. Humans are not fighting for survival. We are fighting for validation. Purusharth, or the other word is significant. I feel significant. So when I win the battle, I feel significant. So when the brother wins the battle against the brother, or in a debating society, when one wins over the other, it's an intellectual violence which is promoted in a very safe environment called the academics. Or a report card. That is also violence. Who is the alpha male in the class at an intellectual level? Who knows the poetry better than others? So the violence is there at every level. It is nothing to do with. It is for me. I'm gender agnostic. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, question there? Yes, please.
I can't help to think that what people are after fundamentally is to get away from the violence, to get away even from validation. That when you think of sort of a Buddhist or a Christian sort of ideal, it's to be totally content in a world where there is no validation or
Absolutely.
no danger to it.
I think that's the state that we would like to be in.
Yeah, isn't that a Gandhi-like sort of fiction also?
You see, while that is there, when you look at the reality of the narratives, when you look at the day-to-day things, I don't think so, because that is also, when I enforce it on someone else, then it is not achieving the same result.
No.
See, when at an individual level I go on that journey, where I would like to strip myself of the desire for validation, it is very different from demanding it of you. Because the moment I demand it of you, you become territory that I want to conquer. Because the conversations now progress into, will you listen to me? If you don't do what I tell you to do, I will starve myself to death. And that becomes, all Indian family, we know how our mothers talk to us. You don't marry, then I will not eat. I'm single, so I have faced that problem for a long time. My mother is very thin right now. But that's what I mean. So at an individual level, yes. But the moment it becomes a collective enterprise, the lines start getting blurred and we perhaps regress back.
But that's right. Because that, in a way, by doing that, you sort of entered politics.
Yes.
You've entered politics and missionary work.
Yes.
And then so on. So you lapse into this wider.
Yes. That's where the problems start.
Yeah.
So I can inspire people to follow my path, but when I enforce it, the line starts getting blurred and then it starts getting ugly and then it really gets messy after some time.
Yeah, Nancy, you have a question. Yeah, here and then next to it. Yeah. Please go.
So I just wanted to know, in the Hindu philosophy, what is the word that means? There is a joy when you give up certain things. Like whatever somebody is asked, and you say, "Theek hai, live." Huh? And there's a marvelous feeling.
Yes.
Very minor, because people who are religious and who are ascetics, they do a lot. But what is the word that you reach? It's not nirvana. What is the word?
Yeah.
See, all Hindu rituals, notice we're uncomfortable with the word.
No,
in this-
मुझे आता नहीं है.
Achha. So the rituals, if you look at this school of thought, these are the Vedic rituals, especially this one. This is not so Vedic as that one. All rituals would end with 3 words: Shanti. Now, Shanti means, of course, very literally means peace, but it means let me be at peace with X, Y, and Z. So the act of letting go is embedded in the concept of Dan. Dan is a wider concept. It can be simplified, means charity, but it means intellectual charity, emotional charity, and material charity. So when you let go, you have allowed the other person to have his or her way. That is the greatest, which is the most difficult thing to do, because animals are incapable of doing that. They will not, because they are just living their life. They'll be either indifferent or violent. But humans have the capability of, even if I'm hungry, I can tear a piece of my bread and give it to someone, or not eat at all. That ability is done. So how evolved are you that you will do that?
Maybe she's even implying renunciation.
Well, that's the root of
No,
renunciation.
आपने कहा that is exactly.
One more question maybe, and that's the final question. Prabir, you can shortly.
Sure,
Yeah, please go ahead.
Is the sense, this desire for validation and this committing to violence has anything to do with the sense of egoism apart from?
In my talks, I don't use the word ego because it's a much abused word. So the moment we use the word ego, instantly a negative thing comes out. But it comes from our desire to. It means just that I want to validate my life. मेरी जिंदगी. हिंदी में एक शब्द है आपका औकात क्या? Auqad is a very powerful Hindi word. The closest English word I can get is significance. I want to feel significant in life. So when I walk into a room and people acknowledge me and smile, I feel alive. I don't feel dead. If you walk into a club, let's say you go to a party and nobody looks at you, how would you feel? You feel completely invalidated. You know, I love these American movies which talk about these cheerleaders and football stars. And everybody wants to be one of the two. And then you have this beautiful mini-series called Glee. It's all about losers. And it's about the desire for validation. And I think it's a very intrinsic human condition. We all want to feel validated. When we don't feel validated, you see, when you use the word ego, it makes you feel almost embarrassed to demand validation.
But why you want to feel validated?
Because we are human beings. And that is the only proof that you're alive. That is the only proof that you're alive. Otherwise, you don't feel alive. Nobody looked at you. There are tribes I've heard in Papua New Guinea, if they want to destroy you, they will declare you dead. They perform funeral rites while you're alive. And then after that, nobody talks to you and you talk about you in the third person. That drives people crazy. Just imagine if you entered your house and nobody looked at you, nobody smiled at you, nobody talked to you, nobody served you food, and they talked about you in the third person. You would go mad. That is validation. Validation is, mujhe koi dekhe. See, the word darshan again comes here. Who is looking at me? That is what we mean by being polite, being gentle, being connecting with people. And that is what is the most scary thing about.
But then there are people, in the Himalayas, like, who have lived 10 years, 20 years without even seeing.
See, that is the journey. Some people, let's look at the other extreme. A Shah Rukh Khan wants attention all the time.
Yeah.
Imagine if Tom Cruise were to come to this university and nobody screamed. He would feel miserable. Now that is the other extreme. So you have people who can walk without being noticed, and there are people who are obsessive compulsive attention seekers. That's a range. That is 0 to infinity.
Yeah, so would the Tom Cruise that felt invalidated had not anyone screamed?
Of course he would feel
when he
invalidated.
was not superstar.
You see, it's a question of evolution. Which stage of your life you are in? Which life are you leading? Maybe 50 lives down the line, he also become a sannyasi. We have that option in Indian thought. You don't have an option in a one-line thought. Jaldi kya hai? What is your hurry? 50 more lifetimes to go.
I think we'll
I just
terminate the
wanted to
questions
ask, where do
here.
you put writers and artists? who are busy trying to validate themselves through their books and their paintings.
They don't believe in one next life, no? The publisher will come in the next. You see, somebody made a very nice sentence. I was talking to one of these groups of people, and they were rather fundamentalist in their attitude, and so my style sort of bothered them. And said, no, we have to do something for the religion. I said, yes, but it will happen 3 generations down the line. Why are you in a hurry? I said, maybe this is not the time. Maybe 150 years later something dramatic will happen. Why are you in a hurry? Because you want to validate yourself as the savior of the religion. It doesn't matter, the religion can take care of itself. So that didn't go down well because it invalidated the completely.
Okay, I think we'll stop because thank you very much once again. I'll have Anil please come in and have a formal